Today, I would like to revisit a topic that I shared with you 2 years ago. There are some teachings that we cannot expect to appreciate without considering them repeatedly. I believe that everything Shinran has to say is in that category. So let's again put a toe into the ocean of Nembutsu. Today's theme comes from the larger sutra. At one point in the story, the disciple Ananda is inspired to ask his teacher, Shakyamuni, a very special question. Ananda says, "The Buddhas of the past, future, and present all think of one another. Are you, the present Buddha, now thinking of all other Buddhas? Why does your commanding radiance shine forth with such brilliance?" It is precisely this question that leads Shakyamuni to share the teaching of Nembutsu, the basis of our Shin Buddhist tradition. Ananda's question is one that we cannot ignore. We often speak about Nembutsu, or the Nembutsu teaching, but it's not always clear what is being referred to. I would like to suggest a way to understand the word with greater clarity. Think about it this way. Is Nembutsu a noun, or is it a verb? To start with, here are the Chinese characters, or kanji. The first one, nen, comes with an upper part and a lower part. The upper part of the character has the meaning of now, and the lower part has the meaning of mind. In other words, nen is the immediate experience of the mind. What the mind is experiencing now is, of course, thinking. Nen could also mean recollecting or remembering something. The second character, butsu, is a sounding out of the Sanskrit word Buddha or Buddhas. Put these two characters together, and Nenbutsu or Nembutsu is to think of Buddha, or more generally, to think of all Buddhas. If you consider how the word Nembutsu is typically used in the BCA, you may notice a discrepancy. Oftentimes, the word is preceded by a definite article, the Nembutsu. Apparently, the word is taken to be a noun rather than an infinitive verb, to think of Buddha, which is the meaning of the kanji. Maybe the Nembutsu is just shorthand for the Nembutsu teaching. However, we often encounter the phrase, say the Nembutsu, or recite the Nembutsu, which implies a meaning quite different from what the kanji say, namely, to think of Buddha. It appears that at some point in the past, our usage of the word lost track of the original definition. I think you will know immediately how to respond if I instruct you to recite the Nembutsu. You will respond by pronouncing the syllables Na Mo A Mi Da Butsu, which correspond to the 6 Chinese characters shown on this scroll. Nembutsu, which originally meant to think of Buddha, has, lo and behold, become a noun standing for the syllables Namo Amidabutsu. For me anyway, this is not a good usage. The appropriate noun to use for these syllables is myogo. When we pronounce the syllables Namo Amidabutsu, we are saying the myogo. The word myogo is usually represented in English as the name with a capital N. Namo Amidabutsu is the 6-character myogo of the Buddha of immeasurable life. The word myogo has a broad meaning that includes several other versions of the name that we sometimes chant, such as Kimyo Muryo Junyorai, or Koga Chorai Mida Son. All of these various versions are the myogo. From them, we can infer that what counts is the meaning of the myogo rather than the sounds or syllables per se. To understand what happened to the definition of Nembutsu, let's go back in history to 7th century China. It was then that Pure Land Master Shandao redefined the word as saying the name. Centuries later, this new definition was transmitted to Pure Land Master Honen in Japan. Shandao and Honen knew perfectly well the direct meaning of the Chinese characters, but their interpretation of Buddhism relied on a text called the Contemplation Sutra. Their focus was on a section of the sutra in which practicers are urged to recite Namo Amida Butsu in order to be born after death in Amida's land of perfect bliss. In the Contemplation Sutra, recitation is a deathbed practice. When the practicer is about to die, he may meet a true teacher who consoles him in various ways. But the practicer is too severely tormented by pain to be mindful of the Buddha. Then the teacher says to him, "If you cannot concentrate your thoughts on the Buddha, you should simply recite the name of the Buddha of immeasurable life." Accordingly, the practicer sincerely and continuously says Namo Amida Butsu 10 times. The dying practicer, although he is unable to think of Buddha, can still be liberated by reciting Namo Amida Butsu as a last resort. Oral recitation is the definition that Shandao gave to the term Nembutsu, which formerly had been understood as to think of Buddha. Because there's always a chance that death may come suddenly, it became popular for practicers to recite the myogo thousands of times every day, just in case, in order to be assured of birth in the Pure Land. To be clear, this notion of hedging one's bets is contrary to the spirit of Shinran's Buddhism. In the modern era, when Pure Land Buddhism was translated into English, the definition of Nembutsu was further altered so that the verb form, to recite words, became a noun, the words that are recited. Nembutsu, as a noun, was equated with the syllables Namo Amida Butsu, replacing the proper term myogo, which means the Buddha's name. Shinran was a devoted student of Honen and of Shandao, but he nevertheless found something quite different than they did in the teaching of Nembutsu. The reason for this difference is that Shinran based his understanding of Buddhism not on the Contemplation Sutra, but on the larger Sutra of Immeasurable Life. And the larger sutra does not teach the practice of reciting the name on one's deathbed. Instead, it teaches the path of thinking of all Buddhas, which is the original meaning of the kanji in the word Nembutsu. In the narrative of the larger sutra, the disciple Ananda is seated in the presence of Shakyamuni Buddha. On this day, Ananda experiences a sudden moment of awakening. He sees his teacher in a totally new way. Astounded by the Shakyamuni's radiance, Ananda exclaims, "Never before have I beheld your face as sublime as it is now." Ananda then asks the most important question of his life. He says, "The Buddhas of the past, future, and present all think of one another. Are you, the present Buddha, now thinking of all other Buddhas? Why does your commanding radiance shine forth with such brilliance?" The answer is, of course, yes. Shakyamuni is indeed thinking of all the Buddhas. He is engaged in the practice of Nembutsu. But rather than answering Ananda's question with a simple yes, Shakyamuni's response is in the form of an elaborate story, which begins like this. In the distant past, innumerable kalpas ago, a Buddha named Torchlight appeared in the world. Torchlight guided countless beings to attain liberation before he passed into nirvana. And then a Buddha named Far-Reaching Light appeared, and then another Buddha named Moonlight, and another. Altogether, 54 primordial Buddhas in succession. Thinking of these Buddhas of the past is causing Shakyamuni's face to shine brilliantly. He is also thinking of the present and the future Buddhas, including his disciple Ananda, a Buddha to be. And at the same time, all of these Buddhas are thinking of one another. This is the way that Buddhas practice Nembutsu. Shakyamuni continues the story by telling Ananda how there was once a king, and this king became a student of that 54th primordial Buddha. The king, having heard the Buddha's exposition of the Dharma, rejoiced in his heart and awakened the aspiration for supreme true enlightenment. He renounced his kingdom and throne and undertook practice as a monk named Dharmakara. So begins the origin tale of Amida Buddha. The monk Dharmakara, who is becoming Amida Buddha, represents the culmination of the teaching of Nembutsu. To remember or think of Amida Buddha is actually to remember or think of all the Buddhas, past, future, and present. Shakyamuni's response to Ananda's remarkable question is, yes, you are right. All the Buddhas are mutually thinking of one another. Ananda's new insight about his teacher is at the center of the Dharma path identified by Shinran. On this path, what is the Nembutsu teaching? Shinran certainly does not regard it as a teaching of last resort, as merely a deathbed practice of recitation. Rather, he esteems it as our first resort, and in fact, the true centerpiece of Buddhism. For Shinran, Nembutsu means to think of Amida Buddha by hearing the myogo, Namo Amida Butsu, and reflecting on its meaning. Again, Nembutsu is for us to remember or think of Amida Buddha by hearing and reflecting, which takes place throughout our lives. Our teachers are said to be praising the name. That is, they are helping us to reflect on and appreciate its meaning. To hear and reflect on Namo Amida Butsu is how Shinran defines a life of awakening. It is the path taught in the larger sutra, the textual basis of Shinran's Buddhism. Here is what Shakyamuni says in the closing pages of that sutra. If there are persons who, having heard the name of Amida Buddha, leap and dance with joy and are mindful of the Buddha even once, know that they receive the great benefit, that is, they acquire the unexcelled virtues. The theme of hearing the name appears throughout the larger sutra, along with an explanation of how the name reaches into our lives so that we may understand its meaning. The larger sutra does not explicitly teach practicers to express gratitude by reciting Namo Amida Butsu, although that is the interpretation often given in the BCA. We started this Dharma message by considering the original meaning of the kanji for Nembutsu, which is to think of all Buddhas. Then we looked at the way the definition of the word Nembutsu has changed. What was originally a verb or action is now often used as a noun corresponding to the syllables Namo Amida Butsu. I noted that the more appropriate word for these syllables is myogo, which means the Buddha's name. To make Nembutsu into a noun is actually a departure from Shinran's teaching. We might better understand Nembutsu as remembering or thinking of the name and on the meaning that it carries. Therefore, the reason for us to recite the myogo, which we've been doing countless times already today, the reason for us to recite the myogo is to hear it in our own voice and in the voices of others. In regard to the myogo, it is not so much our recitation that counts, but rather our hearing and reflecting. To do this is how Shinran defines a life of awakening. I hope that today's theme can be a takeaway message for you. The Buddhas of the past, future, and present all think of one another. Are you, the present Buddha, now thinking of all other Buddhas? Why does your commanding radiance shine forth with such brilliance? Thank you very much for listening. Namo Amitabutsu. Namandabutsu. Namanda.